Roger, I want you to tell me when you were born and where you were born.
Yes. Now,
When were you born?
I was born in Pukaki Street in July the 22nd, 1899. Tomorrow I'll be 90.
That's marvellous. Now tell me, were you born in the house, Roger?
Born in the house.
And was there a doctor or a nurse or anything there?
Yes, there was, I don't know. I suppose so.
Yeah.
My father was pretty well off. And our house was supposed to be the best, finest house in Rotorua, because he had the sawmill, had the timber to build it. And it was built on a half-acre section. And it had a fountain in lawns and garden in front, and a big vegetable garden on the sunny side, and an orchard at the back. And it was just laden with fruit. There was no blight in those days. You had to prop up the branches to keep them from breaking down with the weight of the fruit.
Were there other houses in Pukaki Street?
Yes, it was pretty well. There was only one section, a big section was on the corner. An old lady lived there, but there were houses right through, just small houses. Oh, wait on, there was one place next to us where we called it Galatea Paddock. And every week or so, a wagon came down from Galatea to get stores for the settlers out there. And they stayed in this, stabled the horses there.
And tell me, Roger, you mentioned a garden at home. Did the local Maori people, for instance, at Ohinimutu have gardens there, do you know?
Well, some of them did. Yes, some of them did.
And they had communal gardens, I
They planted the kumaras,
in
mostly kumaras.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you ever go out to McCoy Island?
Well, I went out to McCoy Island with Fred Bennett, who later was Bishop Bennett, with all his family. We went over there to gather cherries. Well, in those days, McCoy Island was half full of cherry trees, planted by the missionaries, I suppose. But you could get a 4-gallon tin of cherries in a matter of minutes. There was such a lot. I think we must have taken about 10 or 12 big 4-gallon tins back home with us.
Well, that's what. Tell me, Roger, the Rotorua Township itself, how far did it extend?
Well, the Rotorua Township just went as far as the station. And there were a few houses along Walker Road, well, what they call it now, Fenton Street. We used to call it Walker Road. But you see, all the houses were close to the shops. There was no conveyance in those days, except a bicycle. Well, on this Fenton Street, they had a bicycle track. Right through, you could ride the bicycle right through. And there was spattering houses, but there was a few houses here in P Street.
This was a fairly old street then?
Yes,
Street.
all this area belonged to the Pruisham family. And it was, anybody could get a section for £10 down and £10 a year. Or £100 you pay the lot off one smack. I bought 2 on the Fenton Street. The Pruisham family, a lot of people leased them. When Second World War started, one of the Prussians was a professor in Germany, and Hitler put him in the concentration camp. And after the war, when they let him out, he had no money, so he sold all these sections off cheap.
Roger, you had an involvement with the land between Victoria Street and Malfroy Road.
No, it's not me, but
well, your family.
Yeah, my grandfather, Mr. Dancy, who was the very first postmaster in the town, he owned from Victoria Street to Malfroy Road, and right back 3 sections. He named Victoria Street after the grandmother. It should have been Wikitoria. And the other one was Toko, after the nickname the Maoris called him. Then on the runoff end, the father owned all that, about 30 sections. And he named Rui Street after my mother. And the centre part was owned, I think, by Walter Steele.
That would be one of the Steele family.
Yeah, one of the Duncan's brother.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask you about the township and about the main street. Which was the main street when you
Well, all the shops mostly were in Arrowa Street. And there were a few shops down Fenton Street, but they were mostly boarding houses down there. In those days, tourists was the only outside means of us getting our living. It's just a straight-out tourist town, nothing else.
What were the shops in Arrowa Street? Do you remember the shops in Arrowa Street?
Yeah, I can name every one of them, I think.
What were they?
Well, they started off Willie Martin on the corner. Then there was Crowger, somebody, a Jew had a jewelry shop. Then there was Randall, and then there was Johnson. Ernie Johnson had a tobacconist shop.
What were the Randalls? What did they sell?
They had a drapery shop, and they shipped it to T-Row afterwards. And they built one very big store there. And then there was Spencer, the chemist. And I just don't know when David come. Okay, he was the first greengrocer. He was an Indian, David. And then there was Musgrave. He was another.
The hairdresser.
Hairdresser. And then Urquhart and Rowe had they built a 2-story building right in the centre.
Tell me about them.
Oh, not much about them.
What were they?
Solicitors. They were solicitors, Urquhart and Rowe. Well, they both died. I think Miss Urquhart carried on. She became the mayoress.
Deputy mayor.
Deputy mayor. She was on the council when I was on.
Yes. So those were the main shops in Arrowa Street.
I think Norman Steele bought a lot of them up when it sort of Rotorua concentrated on Teutonic High Street. It became dead when it went.
Yeah. And what about on the opposite side of the street, Roger?
On the opposite side was the post office, the postmaster's residence, and then the next one to that was, I think it was the council chambers, and then the next was the Maori Land Court. That was a lot.
And
the policeman was there too. But my grandfather had a hand in mapping out the town, and it was his idea to get all the government buildings together right in the centre of the town.
Was the land court, Maori Land Court, a busy place in those days?
Oh, yeah, very, very busy. My grandfather was the interpreter. Besides being the postmaster, he was a first-grade interpreter.
So he was involved with the Maori people?
Oh,
at the land
he
court.
was involved a lot in the marriage.
People tell me that they used to congregate there in great numbers.
Yes. Oh, the talking, very loud speakers they were, and you could hear them all for a long way away giving speeches in the street.
And tell me, Roger, when you were growing up, the electricity had just come in.
Yes, well, the electricity came from O'Kerry, and there was just one line, and they got you'd never know it was there really, and there wasn't any big posts or anything, and but there was no electric appliances. All the houses had to have open. We had 5 open fireplaces in our house.
In Pukaki Street?
Yes,
So the electricity was used for what
only for lighting.
in the township?
Yes,
And did you go out and see the power station?
yes, I went out once and saw it. My father, you know, was he was the first miller in Mamaku, him and his 2 brothers. And then they sold out to the state. Well, there's not much totara in Mamaku, so he went to Taupo, and he built 2 mills there, and he cleaned up all the order around. He built the, he supplied the timber for the Oakary Falls there, where it runs in right down, you know, they didn't have a dam, they just carried along in a big trough, the water.
So that timber...
And all the bridges and wharves, he supplied all the timber for that. He supplied the telegraph poles from Rotorua to Taupo and Rotorua to Pataru. And then when he finished all the big lucrative orders, he pulled down the mill and sold it, and then came to Rotorua and started building.
I always understood the Steels were one of the first millers too in
Yes,
Mamaku.
my father told me that they were there firstly as farmers, but he said his mill was up and running months before the Steels had theirs built.
So your father's mill was the first?
It was the first one
Mamaku.
in Mamaku.
Roger, tell me about the lakefront in Rotorua when you were a boy.
Well, when I was a boy, the lakefront was all
Bulrush.
bulrushes, and it wasn't swampy. It was just shallow, and we used to catch goldfish and carp in there, and koras, of course.
There were plenty of kora in there.
Yeah, Tamatukapu was a great place for holding dances. They also had the dining room. All that kora tails was one of the chief
Foodstuff.
things they ate there.
So they gathered the kora and used them in the dining room, did they?
Yes.
And what about the area where the sound shell is, Roger?
Well, there were 2 big pond pools. They must have been the most suitable place for frogs to breed. There were just thousands of frogs. And when they croaked, gosh, you could hear them right away in town. And I went to the convent school in 1904, and hearing those frogs, I can still hear them when I go down there today.
When you say you went to school at the convent,
Yeah.
where was the convent
The
then?
convent was right on the corner, just opposite the sound shell. There was just 3 nuns that taught us, and they had 3 classes each, and there was one single room, and we played out on the road. There was no traffic then, and
What did you play? Roger?
we played marbles, hopscotch, and tops. we used to make our own tops and keep them going with a flax whip, you know. It was all homemade.
And who were the nuns that taught you?
It was Sister Dorothy was one, and Sister Lambert, but I can't remember the other one.
Mm-hmm.
But the priest that was there was Dean Lightheart. He was a very popular man.
He was a well-known man.
All around the town, he was popular.
Now, Roger, there were always, I think, a number of boats at the lakefront, weren't there?
Yeah.
You know something about the boats, don't you?
Oh, yeah, well, there was MacDonald, you know, he ran for, I think, a company there. And then my father followed up with, he formed a company, him and Ted Inslee. Ted Inslee was a half-caste from Unedited. And they had 2 launches built in Auckland and brought down. And he called one the Victoria after Queen Victoria and the other Alexandra after the other queen. Well, he captured all the trade. He made a lot of money on the lake. He had to increase the fleet by adding another boat, the Roto Tikiteri.
Now, was he taking tourists out?
He took the tourists out every day, and in the off-sea, Rotorua was dead in the winter in those days. And in the winter time, he mined sulphur at Tikiteri, and he had 2 big punts made, and you see, the road was no good then, and then, well, they would have to bring it to Rotorua in a dray, and how long would that take? But with a big punt, they could tons of sulphur on it, one load, and the launches towed them through to Rotorua, and then from Rotorua they went up to Auckland on the train.
What sort of engines did the launches have?
They had marine engines. They were driven by benzene, and
Now that created a problem, didn't it, the benzene, because in those days there were no petrol pumps.
there were no pumps. You bought your benzene in a 4-gallon drum, tin, and gosh, there were tins by the thousand. They were used for building empty tins. They used them for building sheds and fences and all sorts, carrying water and that.
And where did they keep those tins of petrol?
Well, you see, on the start, they got that many tins. They built a sort of a cubicle in on the wharf in the lake, and then in Rotorua for the cars, they built sort of little units for them down Tingai Road. I don't know, there must have been about 20 or 30 where you could hire them off the government, I suppose, and I never did that. I was only a boy then.
And then they'd take the petrol in the tins from there to the
yeah,
lakefront.
they'd take them from there and put them in the car.
Roger, I wanted to ask you about the railway station. That was a pretty important place.
Oh, yes, the railway station was all the amusement of Rotorua. When the express came in with the tourists, the whole town turned out to watch the tourists arrive. And look here, all the board, because Rotorua was full of boarding houses and hotels and all they were down there touting. And they had the names of the places written on their foreheads, and like dozens of auctioneers all calling out at once. They're all calling out, Brent, and Lake House, Lake.
They were meeting the tourists.
I remember one chap, and they're right in the background were all the buses ready to take them to the boarding houses. And I remember one of them was Charlie Andrews. He had a handsome cab.
Now tell me, that's something that interests me. Tell me about the coaches and the coach drivers in those days?
Oh, yes. I don't remember. Dick Garlick, was about the only one I can remember now.
But you'd have remembered plenty of coaches.
Oh, yes. When they went out round the sites, if it was a fine day and they came home, you'd have thought they'd been through a snowstorm.
With what?
They were just covered with pumice dust, absolutely white with pumice dust, all over, down the necks and everywhere.
So
all the passengers were like that.
So the roads were pretty dusty.
Oh, they were dusty. And my father thought that's when he started the launches. And he captured all the trade on the launches. He did very well.
And what about in the town, Roger? Were the roads dusty and the streets dusty?
Well, in 1918, I think, after the war, I went in for become electrician, and I had to go through the shops first in Arrow Street. And look here, it was about 3 inches of dust up in the ceiling. And there was that much dust, I couldn't stand it. I checked the job in.
And that was from the streets?
That was off the streets. That's after the bitumen was put in, of course.
And there was bitumen on Walker Road, was there, Roger?
No, there was no bitumen anywhere at all at the start.
No curbing?
But in the start they put on tar, I think it was, in Arrow Street. And it was a long time before it came into Fenton Street.
Yeah.
Fenton Street was dipped over there by Robinson Street, but the government levelled it off. That's why it's low on either side.
And Roger, you mentioned there was no curbing or drainage problem.
No, there was no concrete curbs in those days. The gutter got, the storm water running down the gutter got deeper and deeper as it got towards the lake, and down at the lake it was about 5 feet deep. That's the gutter. You crossed the gutter on board 9x2 boards or something.
And Roger, I was interested too, your family would have been some of the first to have motor cars.
Yes, yeah, I suppose. I think the first car I saw belonged to Mossy Board. That was Father Ray Board, and it was like a buggy, it had buggy wheels, and I think the engine was under the seat. And it got to the top of the hill where the Catholic church is, and it threw out after it couldn't go any further. They had to get a horse to take it back, and I never ever saw it again.
And what sort of horses did Charlie Cusabs have? What sort of cars?
Cars, the first car he had was a Sunbeam, and after that he had a fleet of Cadillacs, and the Cadillacs, isn't it? Very good cars.
And did he use them as cars or service cars?
All service cars, all service cars. My father, I think he had the very best car at the first, and it was a Rugby. Was it a Rugby or Rover? A Rover. And when he didn't go into the business, he just started off. Was a sort of a taxi that he let from home. He didn't go on the road with it, but if any important people came to town, they'd take his car. And I think the Lord Kitchener hired it, and Lord and Lady Onslow, they were the governors, and I think the King of Samoa. And my father also had the launches, and he took them out on the launches too, you know.
Now, Roger, tell me, I'm most interested in farms in the area. What sort of farms were there?
There wasn't a single blade of grass between uh, the top of
Clayton Road?
Clayton Road in Nongatower, and down the Old Taupo Road there was only one farm, and it was Sheriff's Farm. All the rest was high tea tree, about 8 or 9 feet high. In Nongatower there was 2 Martins, Ebb and Roy Martin. They farmed there. But to go out to Nongatower, of course, the horse went through the various creeks to get a drink of water. I think it was 3 places where you went through. The middle one was the Fairy Springs, and there was a creek each side of that we went through.
And where was Sheriff's Farm?
Sheriff's Farm was halfway along Old Taupo Road.
And ran from Old Taupo?
On the Utahina side. When we went out for a picnic, we went out into the country, and the country was Old Taupo Road. There's no other farms.
And what did Old Taupo Road look like then? What did Old Taupo Road look like then?
Well, it was all high tea tree, about 3 metres high, I suppose. Where the high school was very high tea tree there. You see, when the Maoris gave away all the reserve, it was land that was useless to them. They weren't giving away a fortune then.
Roger, where did the milk come from in those days?
Well, I suppose it must have come from Nongatower, I suppose.
Possibly.
I don't know anywhere else where it came.
And other food supplies like bread, where did that come from? Where were the bakeries?
Oh, well, there was Walter Scott was a baker in Unedited. I remember when Graf first came.
Where was Walter Scott's shop?
It was next to the Lake House Hotel, and Graf's was where it is now. And then there was another fellow called Thomas.
He was a
There may
baker.
have been others. I don't know. Richardson. Richardson, he was in our street down by the lake there.
And did they used to deliver bread in those?
Everything was delivered at your door. The bread was delivered fresh every day at the door.
And the milk?
The milk was, before you got up in the morning, you put out the jug and the milkman delivered the jug, delivered the milk. Sometimes the butcher came round, and sometimes the storekeeper came round. He took orders and then brought the orders the next day.
So the grocer would call and you'd give him an order?
Give him an order.
What did the insides of their shops look like in those days?
Well, there's just a counter. You couldn't get over the counter because you could only look over. If you got over and handled them like the goods like they do today, because you get put in jail.
Now, you tell me about the convent, but you also went to the primary school, didn't
Yes,
you?
there were about, I suppose there was less than 100 in the convent, and there'd be double that at the primary school. There was, I suppose when I was in 1904, there'd only be 300 pupils in the whole of Rotorua.
You remember some of those pupils?
Yes, I can remember a lot of them. Herbie McDonald, Mona Young, and
And what about Gene Batten? Did you go to school with?
I went to school with Gene Batten and the 2 brothers. But I wasn't in the same class. But they were at school when I was there.
And what about teachers?
I remember only one teacher was Mr. Algie. Algie went to the war.
And then, did you leave primary school, or what happened there?
Yes, well, when I left the primary school and went to Auckland to attend the grammar school. And the whole family shifted to Takapuna, and I was away there all through the war years in Takapuna.
Now, back in Rotorua, did you go to Sunday school or church?
Yeah, I went to St. Luke's Sunday School. It was the Anglican Sunday School. There were only 3 denominations in Rotorua. There was the Catholic down by where they are now. Then there's St. Luke's in Haupapa Street, and then there was St. John's in Pukuata Street. But it was on top of a hill. There was a hill there, and it was on top of the hill.
This was in Pukuatua Street?
Yes, they've since dug all the hill away.
And what about ministers? Who were there when you were at school?
Tisdale was the only man that I remember. And of course there was Dean Lightheart.
Now you'd remember also Fred Bennett.
Oh yes, he lived next door. He didn't. He he lived next door to us in Rangiuru Street. We were on one corner, on the Pukaki Street corner, and he was on the Whakaue Street corner. There was a hot spring in the middle of the road in Whakaue Street, and he ran the water into his place and had a bath there.
Now he was the vicar of St. Faith's Church.
Yes, the Mary Church.
Now tell me about Bennett.
Bennett, he was a most beautiful English speaker, and he did a lot for the marriage there. He held concerts, you know, and they performed every week at the Assembly Hotel, Assembly Hall.
Now tell me about the Assembly Hall. Where was that?
That was where Whitcomb's is now, in Tutanikai Street.
Well, next to the Majestic Theatre.
Yeah. Well, that was the Majestic Theatre, was replaced it.
Yeah. And he had concerts there.
Well, Bennett had there were beautiful singers, the Marys in the old days. They were all half-caste, 90% were half-caste. And I think that's where Howard Morrison got an idea of singing. All his uncles were in the choir, and they had wonderful voices.
Was this for the tourist industry or?
Oh, this was for the tourists. The chief item they put on was Tutanikai and Hinamoa.
Now tell me, did you visit Ohinemutu very often?
No, well, there was a lady used to come up. She said she was a relation of mine. She was in her late 20s. We called her Froggy. She had protruding eyes. And she used to take me to, she had a hut between Tamatakapu and the school.
Now you're talking about the convent, are you?
That's the convent school. And she used to take me there to have lunch. Well, this was her house where she lived. Was all raupo walls and a wee roof. They call it wee, I think.
Thatch.
It was about 11 by 7. She slept on the floor, had her meals on the floor, but she cooked outside. But when it rained, she went over to the hot springs just on the other side of Tamatakapu.
What
I always enjoyed that. She used to put on those scones, you know, and boiling fat and crayfish tails.
So she fed you regularly?
Yes, she used to come up regularly and take me there.
Tell me about the Lake House Hotel, Roger.
Well, Lake House Hotel was, I, was the great Maori meeting place, I reckon. It was always full.
Good tourist hotel.
It was a tourist hotel, but one chap I remember there was called Tara, and they called him, he was always there, Tara Lake House. And the story goes that one day a car came along. He'd never seen a car before, he didn't know what to call it. He looked round and then he went up to the fellow, he said, "Ka pai tō wheeler." He called it a wheeler.
Now tell me, what shops were there in Unedited?
Oh, well, there was a shop down at Tower Road where there are now, but that belonged to a half-caste chap by the name of Thomas. And the Thomas was his Pākehā name. Tommy Poruru was his Maori name. And then there was a store run by Mr. Alfred Butt next to the Lake House Hotel.
Tell me about Mr. Butt.
Oh, well, Butt had a big family, and they were all wonderful singers, and one of his sons was a masseur, and another one married into the Danzy family, Edgar.
Mm-hmm.
But they had marvellous voices.
Now you spent a bit of time on Pukeroa Hill, didn't you?
Yes.
Now tell me about Pukeroa.
Well, look here, when there was a football match, they used to start off a ride there, the footballers. They rode there on horseback, and some of them were dressed in fancy dress, and they rode up on horseback to the field. And when they got up there, the first game was push ball. It was a ball about 6 feet in diameter, and these fancy dress fellas played with this push ball.
What was the object of the game?
Well, you had to push it through the goal posts. It's no good one man trying to stop them. If they roll the ball, it just rolled over him.
What was the ball made of?
Just the same as the ones today, of leather and that. And but after the game, they had what they called was that's only the preliminary. The big game started after this. But between the two, they had greasy pig. They let a greasy pig go in the middle of the field, and they released it from a sack, you see. And then whoever caught it, of course they could take it home and had roast pork. But one day, somebody brought a very big pig there and let it go, and instead of the people chasing the pig chased the people and was knocking them over in all directions. And he finished up in the Pukeroa Hill was all scrub. He finished up in the scrub there. Well, that night, my father at least, told me to post a letter. So about 8 o'clock, I went down Arrow Street to post this letter, and just the post office was set a little bit off from the road, and there were overhanging trees, and it was a dark place. And when I went there, I heard a grunt. The next thing, the pig came out. He'd got right down there, and I turned round and I rushed down Arrow Street as fast with the pig after me. And I didn't know where to go. Well, when I got about halfway down, Hawkins had his shop open, and I dived into there and jumped onto the counter. And you know, the pig came right in there after me. And when Hawkins was round fixing his stock, you know, something or other, when he he jumped on the counter too. There's the two of us on the counter and the pig looking up, snorting at us. And he reached over to the telephone and rang up the butcher and told him the position we were in. So the butcher came up with a shotgun and shot the pig.
And who got the pig in the end?
The butcher did. He finished up in the sausage machine.
Now tell me, Roger, how did World War I affect Rotorua? Do you?
Well, I wasn't here.
Oh, you were in Auckland.
Yes.
Okay.
But after the war, I used to come here for my holidays. My uncle had a farm in Tarukinga, you know.
Which uncle was that?
Uncle Ted. And that was
that
on
on
Danzy Road.
Now tell me how Danzy Road got its name.
Danzy Road, there was no road at all there when they took over that block of land, and they had to build their own road. And so when the council came along and continued the road on, they called it the Danzy Road. It went on then right through to Mamaku.
Well, when you came down to Rotorua, did you stay in boarding houses or did you stay with family?
Oh, I stayed with them.
Okay, now tell me about boarding houses.
Oh, well, Charlie Cusairs built a boarding house in Hinamo Street, he called Hinamo House. Oh, there are boarding houses everywhere. Australia and the House, the Commonwealth.
And what about the
Fenton House, Rocky Nook.
What about the Waiwira Hotel?
Oh, that was run by old Faluna, wasn't it?
Faluna, yeah.
Yes.
Tell me
Faluna came to Rotorua, and his wife came to Rotorua. They worked in the lake house. He was a porter and she was a waitress. And they finished up building this Waiwira house. And that was the most sedate place, and even the Grand Hotel, the governor and them, when they came to Rotorua, stayed at Waiwira House.
So Mr. Faluna was an important man.
Yeah, well, as far as the boarding house goes.
Yes. Now tell me about the baths, Roger.
Oh, the baths. Well, the first bath was the blue bath. And all of us kids, there were no bad boys in those days. They all we all played in the blue bath.
Now this is not the blue bath that's there now.
No, it's between there and the road, and the front.
Describe it to me.
The blue bath was just, well, it was a big blue bath, and the water was blue. And it cost us a penny, 1 penny. And you could stay in all day for a penny. And the girls, they swam in the Duchess bath, which is a Polynesian pools today. They swam there. Well, one day something went wrong and they had to do some repairs, so they let them have the blue bath.
They let the girls have the blue
Yes. I didn't know about that, and I ran down there looking for someone, a friend of mine, and I just rushed into the bath, and I thought it was different people at the door, and they were yelling out at me, and I said, I know, I don't have to, I'm just looking to see if there's someone here that I want to see. And when I looked in, there was all these naked girls. And my word, you should have heard the screams. I went back out for all I was.
And what about the big main bath buildings?
Well, the big main bath buildings, well, that is a wonderful place, really. They did a lot of massaging there, and that. This chap, I forget his name now.
Brackybush.
Eh?
Brackybush?
Oh, yes, Bush was the...
Brackybush. Do you remember that name, Bracky Bush?
Brackenbush, yes.
Yeah.
He was in charge of the whole thing.
Yeah. Now, Roger, tell me, when you were a teenager, what did you do for entertainment? Were there dances?
Oh, I never went to dances. I was too shy. But later on, I played a lot of football.
Mm-hmm. And what about the movies? Did you go to the theatre? Movie theatre?
Oh, yes, we went to there was no sound then. The orchestra, everybody went to the pictures.
Where was the theatre?
As the Assembly Hall was the first place. That's owned by Duncan Steele and run by McDermott. And then there was Sloane's Hall. They had pictures there occasionally. And then there was another place across the road.
The Lyric or the Grand?
I forget what they call it now. But
Now,
that was the last place.
yeah. Now tell me about Duncan Steele.
Oh, he's a bit of a character now.
Mm-hmm.
He lived alongside his home was. You see, all the houses were all close to the shops. All the residents of Rotorua lived down between Fenton Street and Tutanikai Street and all those side roads. They all lived there. And Duncan Steele put up a golf putting place on his second. I heard it was very popular.
Now he was involved in the timber industry too.
Oh yes, of course the Steele brothers, they were the sawmillers next to my father's, but they kept on going. They did. My father and his brothers sold out to the state. I'll tell you why he sold out. He was first milling in Ohaupo, and one night the mill got burned down. So after they started in Mamaku, other mills started cropping up all over, and there's very little water, and he's very much afraid of the fire going through there and cleaning it. This is one of the reasons why they sold out. Well, blow me if it didn't go through and the whole mill was burned down after they sold it.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, Duncan Steele was involved in a lot of Rotorua matters, wasn't he?
I think so.
Yeah. What about his brothers? Who were his brothers?
I only knew one, and it was Walter Steele. I didn't know of him.
And what about his partner MacDonald, Archie MacDonald?
Who?
McDermott, Archie McDermott.
Oh yes, he took over he took over the Regent Theatre. See, Jackson, the first mayor of Rotorua was Charlie Clinkard, and he wasn't a citizen of Rotorua at all. He belonged to Mamaku. He had a butcher's shop and a boarding house there. But he wrote a lot of letters in the paper, and he got why Rotorua should be taken away from the government, and the people themselves could make a better place of it. And he got them all worked up to it. So there was a referendum taken, I suppose, and it decided to have our own borough council. Well, he had to be mayor, and in those days, the rating was on the improvements. If your section never had any house on it, you didn't pay rates. Or if it was a very poor house, you didn't pay very high rates. So this Clinkard came down. He bought a one-car garage, and put 2 rooms on the back, and he lived there. He had to be a citizen to be a mayor of Rotorua. Well,
So he established a residence in a garage.
yeah.
And what other mayor do you remember? You
Well, the other one was Jackson. He was a very forward-going mayor. He did a lot. That he was thrown out because he was wasn't spending enough money on the roads and footpaths. He built the theatre, the Regent Theatre, and he filled the lakefront in.
Now, to go back a little bit.
And then after him, Arthur Q-Sabs followed. Well, Arthur did, he was only in a term, but in that term it made all the difference. He changed the rating round to unimproved value. You paid on the section, and all these fellows who had been holding sections on spec, they had to get rid of them quickly. Robinson owned right from Robinson Road to Sumner Street, right down to Reynolds Street. Just a horse paddock. Well, gosh, when he had to pay rates for all that, he had to get it cut up quick and lively. And he sold the sections for anything he could get for them. I think I could have bought any on the Walker Fenton Street there for £30 each. Well, yes.
The land was pretty swampy there, though.
Oh, yes, it was very swampy too. There was a bit of a lake at the Robinson end, and ducks used to come there when the season opened. It dried up in the summer.
Roger, tell me about the slump, the depression in the 90s.
Well, when the depression happened, they started that. That was all of wilderness where Fenton Park is today. That was all wilderness there, and all covered with scrub. Well, they turned it into a airport, and all the unemployed were working there with wheelbarrows and shovels, and they turned it into an airport.
Do you remember seeing your first aeroplane?
Yes. Kingsford Smith came here, and all Rotorua turned out, but he landed over Tingai. I think that would be before the airport here. Tingai on Smith's farm, right at the other end, where the
Copeland Smith
yeah.
on his farm.
Yeah, there's a big paddock there. I remember when Kingsford Smith and Ullum landed there.
But what were conditions in Rotorua like during the Depression? Unemployment?
Oh yes, all the shops, a lot of shops were closed. They, but I was never out of work by both depressions. I knew people had to eat, so I bought a launch and I fished at Makatu, and I fished there right through the Depression, and I got a living out of it. I kept, there were only two fish shops in Rotorua. One was belonged to Kunak, and the other for Bill Costello. Well, one of the boats, there were two of us boats at Makatu. One of the boats fished for Bill, and I fished for Matty Kunak. But when they couldn't get fish off us, the weather was too rough, they got it from the Thames.
And were there work camps here for the unemployed? Did they work on the roads, do you know?
Oh, the unemployed were there just weeding. Very light work. They were just with hose weeding the footpath.
And what about the Second World War? How did that affect Rotorua?
Well, the Second World War.
I mean, there were a lot of troops here in Rotorua.
Oh, yes. Yes, because, you know, the Koro Hill was changed from the football field into a hospital.
That was
grounds.
the First World War that happened.
Yeah, well, that was the First World War.
Yeah.
That's right. Then the Second World War, there's a lot down at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital too.
Roger, getting back to sports that you mentioned a gentleman who was the secretary of most of the sports clubs.
Yes.
Tell me about him.
He came from London, a very well-dressed Englishman with a gold watch and chain, and he went in partnership as an auctioneer. Well, he was very well spoken and a very clever man, and he was made secretary of the Rotorua Golf of the Racing Club and the Football Rugby Union and a lot of things. And he was very popular and threw money around. And I remember I was in this, I played for the Rotorua reps, the junior reps that took the Shalpoon Shield off of Potiki, and they wanted to play us. We beat them and took the shield away, and they said they could beat us if they had their own proper team. So we challenged them again with their proper team and on their home ground. So Granville Hunt, name of this chap, he took us out there, paid for our fares, paid for us staying at the hotel, and on the way back he bought cases of crayfish and bread and butter and that, and we had a dinner halfway back. In those days it took a long time to come from one. It was all potholes, you know. From Rotorua to Potiki was a long way then. And he paid for that, and I think it was a case of beer for the boys. And then when we arrived in Rotorua, there was dinner for us in the Lake House Hotel. And because after a while they found that there was money going astray, and it all pointed to him. And so the police wanted to make a few inquiries from him. They couldn't find him, but they found his clothes alongside of a hot spring in Kuro Park, and made them think he'd jumped in there, I suppose, commit suicide, but he got away in other clothes anyhow. They got him, and the people in Rotorua, he was so popular with them, they got up a fund to pay a good lawyer to protect him in the court. And when it came to the court proceedings, found out he was a habitual criminal from London.
Roger, in recent times you became a member of the Rotorua City Council, didn't you?
Yeah.
1962. How did you enjoy your time on the council?
I didn't think you could do so much. I didn't try to get, I had no idea of sitting for the council. It was the Ratepayers Association came and saw me. At the time I had some land out at Udahina Road, and there was no road to it. And I tried to get them to put a road in, and the council wouldn't. They said the town will never go out there, and it's too high up and that. And I started writing letters, and I condemned them in every way I could, and I called the town a city of septic tanks. And then they came along and asked me to stand for on their ticket. And I said, no one will vote for me. And they said, well, they'll let, you know, a lot of people read them. And I think that it's quite popular. So, well, I said, if you want me to stand, you can pay the deposit. So they paid the deposit, and blow me if I never got in. I just scraped in.
Roger.
But how we did Gus with the things we did, yeah, just one.
Yep. You just hold 2 seconds. Yep. Roger, one of the important things about the election when you were elected was that there were 2 women elected. The first women ever elected to a Rotorua council.
Yes, Miss Urquhart and Mrs. Tapsell from Magatoo. And they were quite good. Well, she became the deputy mayor, Miss Urquhart. But when I was on there, we bought the international sports ground out there. We saved the new bath from demolition.
The old bath
government, the new bath building, they were going to knock it down. And we saved that. We bought it off the government. Or they gave it to us plus 80,000 to do it up rather than demolish it. Then we bought the sports dome in the back, we put that up, and then we developed this Fenton Park, and we bought the airport out there.
So you accomplished a lot in
there's quite a lot.
So you enjoyed your term?
Yes. Sometimes I always spoke up whether the others went with me or not, but they wanted to have the slaughter.
Sure.
She's only pretending to be on our side.